If you don't know me, I'm the Awkward GM Corbin, and I am secretly a Five Nights at Freddy's fan. I've never played a single game, but I am a theorist when it comes to the lore of the game. So much so, in fact, that I create a bunch of Five Nights at Freddy maps for role-playing games that you can download in the description below. Completely free, it's all non-commercial stuff, please don't resell it, blah blah blah. My best guess as to why you're here is because you want to run a Five Nights at Freddy's game to either have a screening of the Five Nights at Freddy movie that just come out, or you want to do it for Halloween. Honestly, I just dated this video by saying the release was happening, but honestly, there are probably going to be new games coming out every year, and people are going to want to play animatronic horrors, even if it's just in the future when Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach 5 comes out or whatever. My credentials are I've been running horror-themed role-playing games for years now, especially during Halloween, because it lets me flex those game master muscles that I don't normally flex. Though I don't have any real muscle, this is mostly flab. What I'm going to give you here today is more general advice for any role-playing game that you wish to choose. Chronicles of Darkness is my favorite, but you can also use Call of Cthulhu, Dread, even Dungeons and Dragons, and a bunch of other game lines. No matter what, horror is horror. First up, Five Nights at Freddy lore is very complex, and if you're going to do this, you might want to have to create your own fan version of Five Nights at Freddy's to avoid any confusion for your players and to also give them some surprises. The main overarching theme of FNAF is that of science and the afterlife. What happens when we die? And in doing so, it has this whole thing of the soul of a person, or the memory or the remnant of a person, is getting merged with technology such as animatronics and even VR games. Mechanics-wise, it is very difficult to translate the mechanics from the games into a tabletop role-playing game. For instance, having just one person in a security room is not very exciting, especially when in a role-playing game you can actually leave the room and go walking around if you want. I forget which engine Scott Coffin used, but basically that engine was very tied to a single viewpoint and then using security cameras to look around. Now, I do try to use security cameras in my games when I do run FNAF related games, where a player can be in the security booth and have vision of everything, and when security cameras flicker and go off, that gives them an idea of where the animatronics are, how to dodge them, or like where to go to avoid them. Jump scares are a big part of Five Nights at Freddy's, and they're pretty cheap as far as scares go in video games, but for tabletop role-playing games, you can't really do a jump scare. Usually you have to build up to it, or if you're going to do a jump scare, you could probably slam your hand against the table and describe immediately and very quickly an animatronic face jumping in front of a player. You should probably give your players a heads up if you're going to be slamming a lot during games, but honestly, I would probably go for a different tact. For me, I like to usually go with the creepy, uncanny valley stare, where there's an unblinking set of eyes that are looking right at you, and the head just cocks ever so slightly to the left, and the dead stare. And sometimes just having an animatronic or having the description of this huge robotic creature towering over you can really put a player on edge. They start to be like, why hasn't it killed me yet? If there is one part of this video that you should watch, it is this. The number one thing that FNAF does is lore. The lore is the keystone that brings it all together. Sure, it was just a flashy game that was played by some streamers years ago, but since then it has built up a narrative. There are things that get mentioned that aren't really fully explored until games later. There is the bite of 87, which happens in the second game, supposedly, because you have a paycheck that says 1987, and you're like, oh, it makes all sense. But then in the fourth game, there's another person who's bitten, and is that the bite of 87, or is that the bite of 83? You have all these questions, and the thing that Scott Coffin does is he does not answer these questions explicitly. If your players are asking these questions to you as a game master, you do not need to explain yourself. You do not need to explain the world, rather. If they are trying to figure out why the animatronics stopped attacking, and they don't know that there is actually a serial killer hiding behind them that the animatronics are afraid of because it's the serial killer that killed them when they were human, then the players are going to have these questions later on. It is going to make their mind boggle. They are going to try and puzzle things out. Whereas if you say, oh, the animatronics are all looking at that one guy and they're backing away slowly, that gives away the game. You are trying to give this story that is mysterious and that makes your players come up with their own theories that they can start building off of. If there's one thing about Five Nights at Freddy's is that it is two games. It is the video game and then it is the lore game. And the lore game, Scott specifically designed, and maybe he didn't mean for it initially, but basically every player who plays Five Nights at Freddy's has their own idea what is going on in the background. They make their own story. They generate what they think is happening, and it becomes this narrative that they own. That's why when you come to FNAF theory channels or theory subreddits, there are a lot of passionate people about how things went down in the timeline and how characters are portrayed and why they have these and what motivations they have. That's why you have all this issue of the players being very outspoken about what they see as mistakes, because it's a game. They've created their own narrative because they were given the building blocks by the game designer. You, as a game master, can now give these building blocks to your players. It's stuff like a little bit of evidence that is hidden in a corner that's like, oh, back in 1887, I decided that I was going to create the world's most entertaining place for children to come. And then have something further on that mentions that this, even though this is from the 80s, this pizzeria is from the 80s, it is actually built off of this larger idea from the Victorian era or something like that. Now, if you're worried you can't make your own Five Nights at Freddy's themed role-playing session or one-shot, I actually created one myself. It is on Storyteller's Vault. There'll be a link down below. It is called Rodeo Randy's An Introductory Chronicle, and I wrote it specifically for new people to try and get into Chronicles of Darkness. It's $3, but there will be a sale as soon as this video goes up, and it will last for a few weeks after Halloween, so if you wish to pick it up, please do so. Thank you so much for watching, and here is another video that I'll show here, probably about horror. Shout out to our patrons for supporting the channel.